So, welcome everyone to Labels and Legacies, Anticipating Adjustments with Atif and special guests. This is our series of monthly free panel sessions where our CEO, Atif, will be joined by expert speakers. Together, they'll dive into thought-provoking discussions on how adjustments are seen and how they're put into practice, and finally, how we can rethink them. Today, we're going to be discussing neurodiversity adjustments, and how we can move beyond diagnosis and the medical model to embrace the full spectrum of neurodiversity. We'll dive into the importance of an anticipatory welcome and creating inclusive environments for everyone without waiting for a diagnosis or without needing to disclose. We want to talk about how this could be a game changer for inclusion or how it could potentially risk leaving someone behind. And that's the big question we'll be tackling today. So I'm going to begin by introducing our speakers. First up, as always, we have Atif Choudhury, CEO and co-founder of Diversity and Ability. Atif is an award-winning social entrepreneur with a background in economic justice and disability inclusion. Alongside his work at DNA, Atif co-founded Zaytoon CIC, a fair trade food company supporting Palestinian farmers. He's also an advisor to the World Health Organization Rapid Assistive Technologies Board and a trustee for Disability Rights UK. We are also honoured to have our special guest today, Charlotte Valeur. Charlotte brings vast experience as a FTSE chair, a non-executive director and corporate governance expert with a background in investment banking. She's a professor, a published author and a lifelong human rights advocate, currently leading as the founder and chair of the Institute of Neurodiversity. Before we get started, as I said, this session will be recorded, but again, only our panelists will be visible and audible in that recording. So I'll hand over to Atif now to kick off the discussion.
Thanks, Scarlett, and welcome everybody. And it's a real joy for me. I know I say that every time I do this, but I get to invite guests that I really want to learn from and share with the world. And, this Labels and Legacies, it's the previous sessions, as we talked about, were on intersectionality. And this one is about what it means in terms of reasonable adjustments and what do we mean by that. But in truth, you can't really separate these conversations. They're deeply entwined with each other. They're entwined to psychological safety and those who are afforded it and those who aren't. Those we speak of as if they just always can come forward and tell their differences. And if they do, they get X, Y, Z support for them. When in truth, it's just a lot harder than we ever realized. It was always harder for me. And I guess that's the point of Labels and Legacies. And this is one of those moments where I think I meet someone who really, I've had the joy of knowing Charlotte, and just in awe of the scale in which Charlotte's work has gone and the influence I think it has. And I'm just excited by that because I think that's where real power gets to really happen as well, that we share our lived experiences, we take our risks, we hope that people hear us. We in times even pray that it doesn't do injury to us. But in that support, we recognize that we have a role not just to protect ourselves, but to speak for others who can't be in that place or in that room. And I'm just saying that it really gives me excitement to introduce Charlotte to you, and Scarlett's done it, and to start with this day's Labels and Legacies, really. So that's it from me, really. I'm going to just continue as we go on. Charlotte, before I say any words from you, before I get into the questions and all.
No, thank you very much, Atif. Thank you for having me here. It's a pleasure, as always. And I was just making notes as you were speaking, because certainly psychological safety is something that everybody should have, right? Mm. And really, as with everything, I think the neurodiversity movement is pushing for things that everyone should have. All other minority groups, it's just a bigger box, right, that everybody can fit into. And I think that was what it made me, as you were talking, I was speaking. I was thinking about that and how when we all come together, that's actually when we can make a significant push for things to go in the right direction.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I want to hold that with people listening today. And I will say this, that, and I may have said it before, and if I do, then so what? I'm going to say it again. That if you have to do more in a workplace, and it could be because you're just a woman, or no, you're a woman, it could be because of racism, it could be for homophobia or transphobia, class, poverty in your life. If you have to do more in a workplace, then you are hardwired to share less. In fact, your survival may be dependent on it. Your growth in the organization may be dependent on it. So when we look at these things and we take organizations through this anticipatory welcome, one of the biggest takeaways is to teach them just that. But it's not enough that they just say, hey, my door's always open. But it's their job to know it might be tough to walk through that door.
Mm.
But what do we do as leaders to hear that rather than just saying, oh, it's safe. These are our adjustments.
Yeah.
It'll be safe.
It's very hard because that safety really is, there's so many aspects to it, right? That psychological safety. And if you're surrounded by microaggressions, for example, lots of little things around you, that's just eating at you every day. That's not it. But some people don't even see those if they are not themselves part of who is receiving those microaggressions. And even the people delivering them don't always see it. It's like there's this empathy or lack of that is quite significant. So what I find interesting is that so many people are saying, oh, autistic people have no empathy. But all the autistic people I know, including myself, actually have masses of it, so much that we feel it intensely when there's something going on that shouldn't be going on, and that we want to help other people to not hurt and understand how much it hurt. I mean, but when you think about how we get treated by the people who say we have no empathy, are then sort of treating us in a way like we need to be trained to be different. We need to, let's check out what our genes are so that we can possibly eliminate us before we're born. All of those kind of things. I'm thinking, if that's your kind of empathy, then I'd rather not have it.
God, yeah.
Because that is not it. That is just not empathy. And enough research has been done around the double empathy issue, like that literally between neurotypes, we find it more difficult to have empathy across neurotypes, but within our neurotypes, we can. Except I think that those from sort of minority neurotypes, because we have had to fit in all the time, we are more acutely aware of other people's feelings and needs because we have had to be to survive. And even when we are that, we're still not included. We're still excluded. I mean, I felt excluded my entire life. I can't understand what it takes to be on the inside of all these different circles that are floating around. And I just find that when I sit with a group of new minorities, I don't have that. There's like no judgment, no preconceptions, it just feels, I know we can have our things between us, right? Because we are opinionated, but we're not judgmental. I'm not feeling that judgment. We can be super irritating, don't get it wrong. Of course we can, we know that, right? Because we are so opinionated, but it's without judgment, I feel.
Yeah. No, just brilliant. Just brilliant. Thank you, Charlotte. I felt the same way. I was always told I'm overthinking, and I was like, oh, sorry for that. And I think and I may generalize a little bit here, but is there anybody on earth that apologizes more than a working class neurodiverse woman who has never felt heard?
Well, so I'm working class myself. I grew up in social housing in Denmark. Struggled in schools, and even within my own family wasn't heard. And in the end, I guess, to a degree, I've just become very, very self-reliant, but probably slightly dysfunctionally so. But I wanted to make very sure that my children don't feel that way and don't feel hurt. So I've always focused very much on ensuring. And unsurprisingly, my children are also, neurodivergent children. If they have different, again, we have a number of different neurotypes within my family. So on one hand, you're thinking, that's hard, because it is. On the other hand, I know that it has built me to be incredibly resilient. Incredibly resilient. However, not all of us survive it. And those are the ones that I worry about, the most vulnerable part of our community, that actually where the resilience isn't building, where it's just going down, and they're getting undermined more and more, end up in deep depressions because the level of undermining has just been too much for them to handle. And that's why we really need to put up our arms around that group of our community. And those of us who, for whatever reason, seem to be able to build resilience through the struggles, need to use that gift to help the ones who can't, right?
But it really puts us at a crossroads.
Yes.
It really does. This is so profound for those listening, I hope. Is that it puts us in a space of agency and empathy stronger than ever, because we feel things. And if we have learned to find a seat at the table, however painful it might have been, but I'm a CEO now, the child in me would not, or even the teenager, or even the young man in me would not recognize anything that is in my life now. But we are in a space where we can either pull up the ladder to say, well, I did it and I got this label and therefore I am this.
That's right.
Or we recognize that it was through, in my case, a lot of love.
Yeah.
Rooting for me, but it was still in my early 30s before I came to terms with that there is more to this struggle than just mental health or dyslexia. Yeah. There was more to my childhood that played a role here.
Yeah.
But I suppose when we say that, the double empathy or the empathy side of it, is that we never stop to say, or you think too much or you're overthinking. So never stop to say, hey, maybe you think too little. Hey, maybe you don't feel enough.
And I think that it's important to be able to have those conversations without falling out.
Yes.
Disagreement is really, really healthy. Yeah. Disagreement and handling disagreement, because it's an opportunity every single time someone disagrees with you. We have an opportunity to grow.
Yes.
We do not have any opportunity to grow when everybody agrees. No one grows. We just stay the same. But when you have different opinions on different things and you go through the process of talking through why you have those different opinions, everybody learns, right?
Totally. And this is the richness of human compassion, and that we learn to do that. It's not easy, but if we're risk averse and so risk averse that we're afraid, then power stays firmly in place. Negative powers of control. When we are, our silence has the most absolute powers in the world.
Yeah. No, we must never stop disagreeing. And I think part of why we are here is actually to do just that. Because from very young children, and I saw it in my own children as well, it's impossible for us to not disagree on a number of things, which is why schools are finding us so difficult, because we disagree and we might. I spoke to someone who runs ION US, and his daughter said to teachers, but you're a bad teacher at 12, right? They expelled her because she said that. I mean, it's like, I'm thinking, how the teachers are adults. Can they really not handle a 12-year-old telling them that from her point of view, they're bad teachers, right? She's highly intelligent, they can't teach her anything. That's bad teaching, right?
Yeah. And what is it, role modeling in terms of voice and agency?
That's right.
Tell someone for exercising.
So you disagree with me, we expel you.
Yeah.
And that unfortunately happens in the workplace as well sometimes, right? You disagree, we think we got to fire you. Well, for me, I go, you must hire someone who doesn't fit in. That is the only way you can get a team that has these beautiful moments of disagreements where the whole team grows.
Yeah.
And then you've got to teach your team to embrace differences and to embrace different ideas and opinions, because that's where they learn. I mean, it's pretty logic, right?
Yeah.
It's not difficult to understand, but people really hate it. Me too. Sometimes if people disagree with me, I'm go, that's so irritating. But I've got to also go towards it and say, I hear you disagree. Can we talk about that? Right? Let's talk, because I really want to hear your side, how you are seeing things from your side, so that I can, maybe move myself closer towards where you are, and you can maybe move yourself closer to where I am, right?
Yeah. I fully look, and I guess in my case, I found my voice, as Scarlett has sort of said, in Palestine, and it's a place where international opinion and everyone has one. And in that space, you find values and people, maybe even from opposing sides, or what could seem like opposing sides, together with grace. And what you can see is also people who, I guess, struggle to know where to find voice. And this, again, isn't just in such geopolitical hotspots. They're in everyday conversations and everyday places. I think.
Sorry.
No, I was going to say. I say this. I think I want to share, and then ask some questions. Really, is to sort of leaders out there, future leaders, because you are leaders listening to this and making the time to think. That I would say that for all of you, when Charlotte's touched on it, recruit somebody who doesn't fit in. And I think to reach out to the most marginalized person in your team and to say, did they feel this? Did they feel that? Did they get to own this? I promise two things happen. And I know this happens to me when I'm talking to an audience that I don't know them. It's that the person I think was the most marginalized person wasn't. It was somebody else. And more of the room have been reached out to rather than splitting the room into what sort of neurotypes or et cetera, et cetera.
That's right. That's right. Because we don't know other people's stories, right? And I think sometimes people forget that. We don't know what people come from. We never know everything about someone. I read once where someone said, if you ever feel a person is boring, then you're the one with the problem. Because all the moments that a person has experienced in their life, even, as 10-year-old child has still had millions of moments, right? That were unique to them and that they can relate and to you in a way that you might never have seen that before or in that way. So I think really, if we are not interested in other people, in understanding who stands in front of us, that's an us problem, right? It's not the other person's problem. It really is your own problem if you're not curious and interested.
That's the word I was going to use, and that's the challenge, isn't it? That we're alive when we're curious. We're most alive when we're curious. And when we don't have that, we're not curious by people, we're obsessed with labels or compliance. Labels in order to meet compliance, which is Then we lose our curiosity of perimeters and spaces that aren't necessarily in those blocks. We say autism means this, or which it doesn't. We never say. No, you gave a really good example. Autistic people don't feel things. Like this is absurd. We will never say black people, they don't like cheese. And I said, I met a black person, he didn't like cheese, and I met another one, and therefore I'm sure of this.
I know, which is absurd. But those generalizations goes on everywhere, and again in the workplace as well. I always struggle a bit with when we have these sort of, here's a guide to autism, here's a guide to ADHD, here's a guide to dyslexia. And I mean, we never have a guide to, the neuronormative, for example, right? We never have a guide. Actually, I've started to try to bring a book together sort of collaboratively on what does it mean to be neurotypical? What is it? And it's quite interesting what comes out when you start thinking about what lies with that group of people. But ultimately, we need to get to a place where it's not them and us, or you're there and I'm here, and we just need to be human beings together.
Absolutely.
But what you do have with the sort of what we term the neuromajority group is a desire to fit people into boxes. So they have the box here with all kind of written and unwritten rules, and a lot of us have no boxes. So you go into a room, there's lots of boxes in the room, and you're the one that has no boxes. It's a bit like living in the world without borders, right? Which young people do through the gaming, for example, or anyone who games online. There are no borders. There are no, you're from this country, that country, I can't step over your border, I can't do this. That doesn't exist in that space. And that's really where, in my view, we need to move closer to a place where, as humans, we can work without limitations. We broaden. That being said, we do need law and order for all of us to live. and survive. We need certain rules that needs to be ideally adhered to. But those rules are changing all the time. Change is a constant. Nothing ever stays the same, right? We have just changed the last 5 minutes. We became 5 minutes older, right? We can't reverse that. Change is a constant and is a given. So when you have these boxes of rules, I think we are here, among other things, to push those walls of those so that it expands, so that more people can fit into them. But if you think about a situation, for example, as we had in the UK recently with riots, when something starts going wrong, you have a civil war, then it's actually the walls of those boxes that hold society in place. So we shouldn't underestimate the importance of someone holding on to those boxes, right? Because when everything goes a bit crazy, I know from my point of view, I just want to go home, close the door, and disappear.
Yeah.
Where that's actually where you find another group of people or types that will rise, that don't rise normally, but they will rise and they will hold on to the walls, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Where a lot of minorities, we will become very uncomfortable in a scenario where there is, disruption.
Yeah.
Or eruption, or whatever you want to call it.
And I suppose it's where, I get that. I think that was a really good example. I do wonder, sometimes absolute freedom is perhaps no freedom at all.
I don't think that works. Yeah.
But I guess it's not my place to confine the rules of that, but it is my place to play a role in how we get there. Do you know?
Yeah. And to keep challenging the rules, written and unwritten, to keep challenging them, to say, well, we do need something as simple as you have to look into people's eyes. All my childhood, people saying look in, and I didn't understand why they kept telling me to look into people's eyes. So in the end, at like 11, 12, I thought, it clearly want me to look in. So then I was overlooking, right? Because I don't understand the rule, and there's no way I could read it, right? So you can look into people's eyes, but don't do it beyond 2 seconds, because if you do it more than that, then you're onto something else. If you stand in front of someone of the opposite sex, you might be, trying to pick them up. Stuff that I don't even get. So then I was overlooking, and people then found that I was being aggressive.
Yeah.
Because I was looking into the eyes too long, as opposed to not at all. And it was very confusing. It took me time, and still today I have to consider how I am looking into people's eyes. It doesn't come natural. I have to consider it.
This is great.
Work with it, right? To make sure that I do, and be hypersensitive to when they feel I have now looked enough into their eyes, right?
Yeah. No, Charlotte, this is so. This is cultural competency, right, at its best. At some point, I'll literally introduce you to my wife, but she's from Lithuania. And there is a dilemma in a culture that doesn't necessarily lend itself outside Lithuania, and Eastern Europeans have, and then doubly, she's a tall woman, she's a tall blonde woman, and so she has to navigate Englishness and the excessive, what she says, the flowers that are needed in order to have a conversation. And I relate to it. I found it always quite refreshing when I was getting to know her that somebody is simple about what they want, a quick yes and no.
In Danish, we are as well. We don't have please. Please doesn't exist in Danish.
All right, yeah.
So we would say, can you give me that?
Yeah, okay, yeah.
No, please. No, please comes in. You have to, and again, that took me years to learn that I have to add that little word at the end of my...
No, Bengalis, we are, I'm generalizing here, but we have a word, as in thank you, dhanyabad, but we don't have please. But what we do show is language isn't just what we say, it's how we say it. But it's pitch, it's tone, but it's also gesticulation, it's how we move, so we show enthusiasm with our smiles and our excitement. And this is something, again, that I think doesn't translate. And then when you are talking about neurodiversity, and I think we are, or hidden differences themselves, there is a lack of cultural competency because we've defined a perimeter to say, as you've said, is if you're autistic, you're supposed to be like this. If you're dyslexic, you have to. And what we haven't done is said, what does it look like for you, for your nation, for your people? When you talk about boundaries and borders, my mind also went to Africa, but it could be India, it could be. But no, because Africa is states and constant borders, right? Control country, but not a single African, and I really want to state this, made not a single African had a control in the borders of Africa. These are tribal lines, and these tribes spread across 4 or 5 of these countries.
Yeah.
And they recognize the tribal lines, but we don't look at a map in the same way. The same goes to the Middle East. Not a single border of the Middle East is made by someone who's from the Arab states, and not a single Indian had a role in the border of India or Bangladesh or Pakistan. So if we don't control our borders, why would we control our education systems?
Yeah.
So the challenge is that when it comes to neurodiversity or neurodivergence or whatever we find comfortable in that, the sense of othering or belonging or the seeking is still deeply, and this is a question I'm going to bring to you, it's still deeply ingrained into Eurocentrism.
Yeah.
It's deeply ingrained into social acceptance on a class-centric basis of what we determined autism to be. We as Europeans, and we of a particular brand of Europeans or a class position. So this creates the medical model that we have on neurodiversity, ultimately. And it controls the rules of participation to give us what we have, which is, if you have this label, this means that this.
Yeah.
We are growing to mature this conversation to people of color. I feel like I'm playing my own quiet, hopefully not so quiet role in that. And I'm meeting people. You're a brilliant example, I know, from your own children's experiences, mixed heritage children, like mine, how they show up in the world with this conversation.
Yeah.
So my question is, have you seen a shift that makes this understanding of neurodiversity from your work as, from a global organization?
Yeah.
Seen a shift that has made us understand neurodiversity and adjustments from a global position at all? And I'm asking that question to you.
Yeah. It's a great question, because I speak personally to minorities around the world, all different countries. We interestingly seem to have the same experiences as we grew up, across cultures, across countries, regions. The experience we have with the sort of people around us is the same. As this feeling of belonging is difficult for all of us, no matter where we are, which culture we are in. The movement from the medical model to social model is painfully slow. It's painfully slow. And in most places, it has not moved. We are still operating from the medical model. I think, to be fair, in neurodiversity, from what I can see, UK is actually leading on it. It's a bit of disappointment to me, being Danish originally. I would have thought that the Scandinavian countries has got a handle on this. That is beyond any other country in the world. But that was, I haven't lived in Denmark for 33 years, but that is not the case. In fact, they are very much still leaning into the medical model. And it's very difficult for those in my family who, for example, are autistic in Denmark. They do not want to talk about it. They do not want to be openly disclosing it, because it will be hard for them, and they'll be misunderstood. And they'll be put, in one case, into institutions that are dealing with them as mentally ill. That's another thing, because the medical model often makes them classify being autistic as a mental illness.
Yes.
And that's like significantly problematic, right? Because that indicates that they think this is something that can get cured and changed. And then if you do get into an institution, you can effectively never get out again, because guess what? It doesn't change and it cannot be cured. So what you are is what you are. And it's just, it is what it is. But you can see how you then get stuck in certain institutions. So we have not moved on. Most of continental Europe is still in the medical model. All the African countries I have spoken to are still very much in the medical model. Even sorry, I've got dogs around me, so sorry about that. Even in the US, in Canada, we still have to push pretty hard to have conversations beyond the medical model. I've just been at a trauma conference in Oxford for 4 days, where we had master classes with trauma experts, who actually, some of them, that's another group of people, don't believe that neurodiversity exists. They believe that all the traits of autistic and ADHD, for example, is simply symptoms of trauma.
trauma.
So that's a whole other aspect of, and we had someone at like a long-standing high expert in trauma saying to like 150 therapists, well, autism is a fancy diagnosis for trauma, or a trendy, not fancy, trendy. And I was so angry I couldn't even ask a question, because I felt erased there and then. I felt that being autistic, which has become sort of part of my identity over the last 10 years since I realized that I was it as a late diagnosed, that was a hard journey to go through. It was hard for me to go public on it. I have a professional career alongside what I do, and I felt very unsure whether that would be the end of my professional career as a professional board member. I did not know whether it would mean nobody would ever want me on a board again. So I took that risk. After having consulted my children, because it affected their potential prosperity as well if I lost all my income, right? So having gone through all of that, and then to have someone saying that actually what you've just been through doesn't exist was impossible for me to swallow. And I'm still struggling, but we're going to do work in that area so that we're not having many of us meeting therapists who doesn't understand neurodiversity, erasing who they are.
I mean,
I see someone says it's so shocking. Thank you. I found it so shocking. I was fuming. I walked around for 2 days fuming in that. But I'm now working, after I calmed myself down, for the next year's conference to have presentations on neurodiversity and the difference between neurodivergent traits and trauma symptoms. Because if it is that badly understood by experts who are like, in the 80s, one of them literally says it's because of cold mothers. They have not moved away from the last century's idea that refrigerator mothers makes children autistic. It's just extraordinary.
No, absolutely. Oh no, I mean, there's so much in that. It's a podcast just on this conversation itself. Shaming mothers has been an industry. Shaming women is
mothers are getting so much, right?
Yeah, and so I mean, I look at this similar way in terms of if it helps, I always think when it comes to dyslexia and struggles as a kid, and I'm making eye contact all of it. So when you see a deficit model, why would you sign up to it? I have a model that says I've got a learning disorder.
Yeah.
I've established things around the world, but I have to wear a disorder narrative. Why? Why am I safe through that? I'm not. But the conversation then is about, what do you reclaim from that? What is liberating from that? I can't be mildly or severely dyslexic. I just am. But you know what?
Or what about being profoundly autistic?
Yeah.
Simply that some of us have additional disabilities that makes it significantly difficult for us to mask all the time to please other people.
Yeah.
So if I get dementia as I get older, I will be much more like I was as a child, and it will be much more visible to people that I'm not, that I'm not typical in my way of behaving, because I won't be able to hold it in place in the same way as I'm doing now, right? And again, it's just so badly understood, which is why we've got to have the walls of those boxes widening.
Yes, no, I mean, it's a good example. If I'm going to sort of play with this a little bit, you'd always say, oh, we think outside the box. And I think, well, I think I tripped up on the box on the way in. I didn't even see the box.
I just don't think we have a box. That's the thing. I don't
that's what I mean. But there's a question like, I cannot be, and you cannot be mildly or severely Danish any more than I can be mildly or severely Asian, right? Or Bengali.
We just are. Right? Yeah. I can't be like extremely blue-eyed or a little bit. The whole thing is just crazy that we have to define, the range of where we
through a deficit, right?
Yeah.
So we have to show. I mean, this is going to be emotional a little bit, but we have to show how hard we bleed in order to be let in, right?
Yeah. The whole idea is struggle with social rules. So I always change that to struggle with typical social rules, like that is demanded of us to follow social rules that doesn't come natural to us. Yeah. And so does actually, let's just make that clear, neurotypical people struggle with our social rules.
Yes.
So that's why they want to force us to be like them so they can understand us or think they can, right? And it's not a them and us, and I don't really, but it's hard to have this conversation without having these comparisons. And that's really where the empathy piece comes in, because why do we all have to fit into what one part of humanity wants to be? Why can we not just all be and enjoy those differences and learn from them?
And in this context, I mean, I struggle with, and I share that often, that labels, and that's why why it's called labels and legacies, right? Because labels are deeply liberating and I'm not anti-label. I always stress that, and I often say it is deep. Of course,
I can see both sides of it. I mean, because the North Star for the Institute of Neurodiversity is a world with no labels.
Yes, yeah.
So the North Star is that we don't need them, but right now we do for protection, right? So unless we can make being different neurotypes a protected characteristic, that's where I would like us to sit, right? Just like being pregnant is like, in certain ways, you are a bit vulnerable to society, and therefore you are protected. Like ethnicity is, right?
But the challenge we have, and we don't have to answer it straight away, but I guess this is to those listening as well. Is as Audre Lorde rightly said it, that can you build a new house with your master's tools? And can we? And I don't have an answer on this. I wish I did.
I think you can certainly use some of the tools for sure, because society does need certain rules to hold itself together. I mean, for thousands of years, people have thought of how do we make rules. So we have religion that gives us rules, around moral, ethics, what have you, and certain things you can and you can't do, the 10 Commandments. All of these things is mankind's effort to make sure that we kind of can live together in a reasonable way. And of course, it's a moving target, because we evolve all the time. I mean, if we don't burn people on the fire anymore, right? In a public place. Thank God. I mean, but so we moved on. But in those days where we did that was quite normal, right?
Yeah, no, quite. So, okay, I'm going to move us slightly, but I just think that the trauma-informed care approach is so rich. It's also, trauma itself is a study of Europeans understanding the world. So, as is psychology. So again, it does not invite the world into the conversation; it imposes the world into the conversation. If I'm going to be a bit strong on this, hysteria was a thing that Gestalt scientists in Germany, led by Sigmund Freud, think that only women, and particularly women who like sex, have hysteria, but men can't have it.
There was sexual abuse of them.
Absolutely. So when we look at these things, power reinvents itself.
So he shut down when they realized that happened in all layers in society, and he couldn't come up with that, so he shut it down.
Yes, no, quite. So, but I'm going to just stay on this trauma point, although it's not, is learning isolation is a term I like to use, because it allows me to not pathologize someone's experience, put it upon them. So learning isolation for me was traumatic, not making eye contact, being afraid to speak, knowing that I'm defined at school through how well I spell, knowing I don't do that. And so learning isolation is a place of trauma. ADHD, my response to it, maybe, but but it's very difficult, like I'm saying, being mildly or severely Atif or severely Charlotte. You cannot separate these things.
No.
But the challenge is to all of us listening to this is to know that we can have enough forgiveness in ourselves.
Yes.
Self-forgiveness to say it's okay for us to trip up on that box on the way in. It's okay to not fit into it. It's okay to just reject it. And it's okay to be angry about it at times.
Yeah. But I do think once you have children, I mean, for me, a lot of things changed in that way. My children, even though I've got 3 children, each of them were different inside my stomach whilst I carried them. As soon as they started kicking, they were kicking in different ways. They were floating around in there in different ways. One had like an elbow will go across the stomach in a really scary way, but the 2 other ones were much softer and rounder. It already starts in there. They're forming, in my view, a certain base way of being already inside the uterus. And when they come out, they were all so different. Instantly from day one, there were different how they, latched on when they're born, and they have to latch on to the breast. They did that differently, each one of them. They just did everything differently. And I think that's to say that how you were born is something that is derived from trauma is just like crazy. It's like such a lack of understanding of literally how human beings come out, right?
Yes. Yeah, no, absolutely. So, okay, I would ask another question, and I think that I suppose I'm going to put your Institute of Neurodiversity, but perhaps even your previous role as Institute of Directors on is, do you feel, and I'm asking that, and the audience, those of you, if you also reach out to us, if anything we've said hasn't made clear, reach out to us. Time is, but particularly on the social model, medical model, please reach out to Scarlett and the team. So do you feel there's enough sort of cultural competency in companies around the world that you've dealt with that can really say, yeah, we understand this from an intersectional point of view, from a talent point of view, and if necessary, from a trauma point of view?
I'm so sorry about the dogs now.
We can't hear it. That's okay.
Yeah. So I don't think there's enough understanding. Far from. Because it's we're still having such basic conversations that we shouldn't be having, and that's because of lack of understanding, right? And I don't think that we can, in a basic way, really give enough understanding if people are not interested in receiving it. And I think, and that's why we very much try to drive a cultural change, a global cultural change, which I know is a big ask or a big vision, but it is we cognitively develop all the time. I worked in boardrooms for 20 years, and in the beginning, for years, I was just the only woman there. I was also the youngest one there, and it was very clear there was a certain kind that would be invited into that place. And I tried to look into why is it that this is not changing? Why is it so hard? And it's actually, in some cases, willful blocking by the people who has the privilege, right? Because why would they want to change? I mean, it's they like things as they are, where they get a big piece of the cake, basically. So in other cases, it's a cognitive maturity level where they simply do not have the cognitive ability to think about diversity in a broader way, that if you went to, the other class in my school as a child, you are different to me, kind of. But that's not it, right? If they, come from the same socioeconomic background, blah, 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 ethnicity. So I don't think we will get that full understanding until we have evolved cognitively a bit more. And I think I'm very trusting in the younger generations because they seem to have it. They speak to sub 40-year-olds, they seem to naturally get, it's a different conversation. We don't have to explain, it's a different conversation around inclusion, around diversity, around what can and cannot say. The whole idea that, they're so woke, I think that's a disgrace when people, especially my generation and older, call young people woke in a negative view, with a negative connotation, because they are changing our cognitive maturity. They are working at a much more holistic level, where actually they see the world as much more interconnected, and all of us much more interconnected. Partly what has helped is this online gaming, I think, and connectivity that they have across borders and ethnicities and ages and neurotypes. It doesn't matter. None of that matters in that world.
Yeah.
And so when they bring that out, I know many people don't like it, but it's teaching them this, actually making them more mature.
And and you're right. And I think beyond the gaming, if I may, it's also just the age of the internet, the age of a global world, global access to information. And I think that we are inheriting that for what, but I also look at, which I find, a struggle in the sense of, are these conversations enhanced enough around class struggle? Are these conversations embracing, because what we're seeing, well, if I was looking at the current sort of, I suppose if we're going to call it the sort of Z generation, is it a voice that's sort of made of a generation, or is it a large voice with engagement from university settings? Because that's where I'm looking for, to say, show me where that class struggle says, I and I look at queer liberation as a really good example because I think it's such a healthy example where my generation was preoccupied with who's straight, who's gay, who's not, who's neurodivergent, who's neurodivergent. Now we're watching an identity. We have embraced an identity of fluid identities. Actually, I think it's so deeply liberating.
Yes, it's amazing. We can learn a lot from the LGBTQ plus movement, and we should learn a lot from that and collaborate deeply because they have really moved the dial in the Western world. Again, when we look at a global level, not so much, right? So what we often, the neurodiversity movement is whether we like it or not, it's a very white movement still.
Yes.
We are trying to work very hard at ION to bring all the regions of the world in. And in the last UN World Autism Awareness Day that we organized, we did have representation from all the regions, and we were trying very hard to keep white people to the 20% white people are in the global perspective. Even if we are 95% in the neurodiversity movement currently, we've got to pull other aspects of the global, picture into it. Because again, if people have been ignored for centuries, you can't expect people to keep leaning in, right? I mean, some people have to just bring people in, right? Yeah. So it's, everything is moving, but we have to be very clear in the Western world that what we are achieving here is not happening around the world for most people.
Yeah. But I also think, and this is another podcast which we'll do together gladly, a question of positionality and power, where we're looking at the idea of cultural competency and can we make them more progressive and developed on our understanding on neurodiversity, which is one question. But I think the more important question is, what is it, the richness of that experience that they inhabit? Should they have been in control of education systems and even what it is to be human? What would we have learned? And what does neurodiversity deeply miss? Because we
haven't had those voices.
Yeah, we are not inviting them, we are imposing upon them.
Yeah.
I think
which is why what we try to do with ION, so the global piece is really just support for each country who wants to set up. It's not a country in itself. It's supporting a country, but it has to be set up by people in that country, right?
Absolutely.
And then they have to run it so that it fits into their country, but with the backing of all the other countries who are also setting up. So you can go into your own government and say, we are part of an organization of 500,000 people or whatever, the goal is 1 million in the first. And then with that weight, they can have weight with their own government to make things better, right?
That's fantastic. This is fantastic. Yeah, this speaks to so much of a conversation that we're going to have more of publicly and as well as. So, okay, I have a question for you. And then I guess it's my last question. Recognizing that there's some clear, and I think we share that, a kind of almost a fear that we're not moving at the right pace. I think that's, but we're also not looking at cultural competency and the positionality of power when we talk about people, and we are too label centric. We just are too label centric.
Absolutely.
We're obsessed with it, and it's a disorder deficit model at best. But when people are in pain, they need to be seen, and then what we're seeing that is I always say we're at a very powerful crossroads at the moment.
Yeah,
either labels become more enhanced, but not relevant for people of different global experiences, or they become more of an indicator of how people might learn, but we open up spaces to intersectional barriers beyond just the label.
Yeah.
But I have a question for you, is knowing those feelings and how much embedded and passions we have on it, and work to be done, what keeps you hopeful?
What keeps me really hopeful is actually the younger generations, because I love their mindsets, right? I love how they actually just push in. So I have young people mentoring me all the time. I had for the last 16 years had that. And I learned so much from their way of thinking in what the world should come to. Many have a feeling of an existential threat, which I didn't have when I grew up, but the young people today do. And we really got to acknowledge that, because my generation has been part of creating that, very much so. So it makes me incredibly hopeful when I speak to young people around the world and hear their their thoughts of what things should be like, because they are all on the right track. It's very rare to speak to a younger person who isn't. At the same time, we don't want to put all the responsibility on them to change the world, right?
Yeah.
What we need to do, and that is why I'm less hopeful, is for my generation or for 50-year-olds up, to stand behind those young people and lift them into the decision-making position where they're part of the process of making decisions for where the world is going in every way, also in neurodiversity. And which is why lifting our voices and teaching people to self-advocate and encouraging it and really stand back with our experience and just be that elevator of their voices. So not elevate our own voices. We are here to elevate other people's voices, including my dogs. I'm really sorry about that.
Okay.
But do you know what I mean? That's my hope, is because I see that they are willing and eager and passionate and interested and have the right way of thinking about things.
Brilliant, brilliant. Charlotte, that's a love. I mean, I wish there was more time for us, and then we're going to do another one. But I just want to say, yeah, elevate voices. What a lovely thing to finish on, on this, to all of you listening, and elevate your voices, elevate others. I mean,
all of us need to speak up. Yeah,
absolutely. Listen, thank you, Charlotte, so much for this. To Scarlett, I'm going to hand to Scarlett now, and just say thank you everyone for listening, really. And this is a global conversation, and it deserves that. In the very least, that's how we should show up. Thank you, Charlotte, and hello, Scarlett.
Thank you both so much for such an impassioned conversation. And although today we focused on neurodiversity, as Charlotte pointed out at the start, the bigger conversation is about what work could and should be for everyone. Psychological safety and a sense of belonging are things we all deserve in the workplace, and this movement is about embracing new approaches, fostering innovation, and recognizing those different ways of working. Charlotte, you so eloquently pointed out that the work that we still have ahead of us, when you said the transition from the medical model to the social model is painfully slow, and in many places we've not even started to move. So if you're curious to learn more about the social model and about its impact and why it can change so much, you can check out our blog for more insights. Access, adjustments, and inclusion are everyone's responsibility, and you can make the first step today by exploring our catalogue of workshops via the QR code. Our training is lived experience and expert-led, so that means we've done the policy trawling for you. Our services are about saving you time and ensuring you're exceeding inclusion standards, and that's whether you want to start top-down or bottom-up. Our training is designed to suit different needs of C-suites, leadership, line managers, or your entire workforce. And our asset-based approach delivers on the light bulb moments that hopefully you've experienced today for your entire team, so everyone is galvanized to act. Remember to keep on sharing with us what keeps you hopeful on social media by using labels and hashtag labels and legacies. And thank you to everyone that shared with us in the chat. We really value your contributions. Don't forget, you can join us for the next episode of Labels and Legacies in November on the 13th. And thanks again so much to Atif and Charlotte. And to you all for joining. We'll see you next time.